It was July of 2014 when the Compassionate Care Act was signed into law, and that's begun the process for medical use of marijuana with strict guidelines on how it is grown, distributed, and administered here in New York State. This, as other states, notably California and Colorado, are already prescribing marijuana for medical reasons, and where use overall, particularly in Colorado, is very liberal. Now, we're going to take you out west inside a growing operation for medical purposes, which was the spark for this discussion, with a Western New York connection, and people who think cannabis is a cure for everything. We're going to hear from them. We're going to meet several guests here in studio who have a slightly different opinion, including medical, addiction prevention, and legislative leaders. And we will interact with our studio audience here at the WBBZ-TV studio. And in our first segment, I want to introduce to you the executive producer and owner of WBBZ-TV. Phil Arno is up on our main set, and he's joined by radio personality, Buffalo broadcast, and National Hall of Famer Joey Reynolds. We'll find out how his connection to pot made this program possible, and his longtime radio and television co-host to set this all up, Jay Sorensen.
Joey's daughter has been growing marijuana in California. And for someone who's a recovering person, this is kind of odd in a way if you look at it that way, but, and I'll let Joey tell you how he felt about that perspective of things. But I go way back with Joey. I've known Joey since I was a young man, and I listened to him on KB radio here in Buffalo. I lived in New Jersey, and some of you may have remembered Joey on KB. And we came together at a little station in New Jersey. I joined him replacing Howard Stern on WNBC in New York City. So we've worked together a few times already. And Joey, as you mentioned, is in the Hall of Fame, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is unusual for a radio personality to be so named, but he had that much influence on them. And you know, we've watched each other's families grow. And when I say grow, I mean literally grow now. And so, you know, we have roots that are very, very strong. And I wish him all the success with this particular documentary that he's put together. And I think you'll find it fascinating, actually, because it's quite illuminating. It's about his relationship with his daughter, more than it is about growing marijuana.
Phil, Joey came to you back in last December, really, to set the stage on this. Explain your interaction and your history with Joey before we get into his story.
Well, Joey and I go back a long way as well. Joey actually showed me around Hollywood when I moved out there. Joey was involved in the film industry. Joey is in the midst of a Hall of Fame career. He's not just at the beginning or end, but he's in the midst of a career. He was involved with the film industry. He's a Hall of Fame radio guy. He's been on television. He worked for the 20th Century Fox. He was in the record industry. So he's been just about everywhere you can be in the entertainment industry. And he showed me the ropes out in Hollywood. And we've stayed in touch over the years. And when he came to me and said, hey, my latest little project is this thing that my daughter's involved with, and he did a little documentary on it, I said, what's that? And he said, it's medical marijuana. And I said, well, okay, that kind of fits. And nothing surprises me with Joey. And so we started talking about it, and I said, hey, Joey, that's a great subject, because here in New York, that's just coming into the discussion phase. We're now in the midst of breaking that in the state. It's being discussed. The governor signed it in. And it's now being done. As a matter of fact, just recently, they've started issuing permits for people to grow it medically. So it's prime time for that discussion to take place.
Now, flash forward. Now, Joey, we've got your background for those of you, for those viewers out there who don't know. So here you are in New York, in Florida, where you live, and your daughter calls you. What was the call like? What was the experience like? And what was your reaction when your daughter said, Dad, I'm growing pot?
I went to visit her, and I walked into the garage, and it looked like a scene out of one of those sci-fi movies, you know, with the illumination of all the lights in these plants. I thought it was going to, you know, be a little field of a couple plants that she had, but there were 1,000 of them. It was amazing. I mean, I'll tell you, my jaw was in my shoe when I saw it. And she was telling me that she had decided that there was money in it, but she mostly liked growing. and had a grandchild. You know, I wanted to see my grandchild and my daughter, and my other daughter was with me. We all went out and visited, and we were pretty amazed at the growing field. We had a good experience, my daughter and I, in her garage, and then I got over it. But I'm a sober guy, you know. I mean, I haven't smoked pot in 40 years, and it became a family matter.
Well, one of the things that you did was you grabbed an iPad and you went over to your daughter's farm and you started to record what it is that she's doing. In fact, to set the stage even more and let our viewers see exactly what you saw, we'll meet your daughter Mercedes. Take a look.
These are new babies.
New babies. So,
What's in here? What's in that secret room here?
Last time you saw this room, it was empty.
Wow.
Here's my license, by the way, before we go any further.
Okay.
This is all good. So,
Wow.
you saw these guys.
Oh, wait a minute.
These guys were those guys last time you were here. These guys were
They
the
become
babies.
adults.
These were the babies you saw last time. You can tell this room is much cooler than the others because we need to keep the mites away. Dang spider mites, I'll tell you. They're,
What are
worse.
spider mites? What are they?
Basically, they're little parasites and they eat your vegetation. They eat the plant.
Oh, you mean government employees?
Basically. These are 3 kings.
There are what, 3 kings?
Yep. 3 kings.
You mean they were there at the Nativity?
Yes. They brought myrrh and frankincense.
Yeah. I don't think this is what the 3 kings
And
brought.
gold.
And what?
And gold.
You hope they bring gold.
I hope they bring gold.
It's a mixed emotion for me because I am a sober guy. I'm in a 12-step program for many years. And my daughter was too. She was in a school for troubled teens for 5 years. We've had issues with drug abuse. You know, I was using a lot of that stuff, and the beginning of the marijuana program for me was in my recovery, where my sponsor said, if you do not stop smoking weed, I stopped drinking. I went to the meetings to work the program to not drink, but I needed also to work it to not smoke marijuana. And then, you know, they say that marijuana is a gateway drug to other drugs. I don't know that that's necessarily so. I had so many other issues that were covering it up that I don't believe that it is that. I think you have to really be vigilant over everything that you're doing. I don't do any of it because it doesn't work for me. I can't drink. You know, the great saying in the 12-step meetings is 1 is too many and 1,000 is not enough. Marijuana is a whole different deal, though, than drinking. Marijuana it relaxes you.
Phil, in looking at the documentary and hearing Joey's story, you know, bringing this to television, and particularly our station overall, was actually quite a brave move.
I have a curiosity about this, about a lot of things, but when somebody brings me something like this, I place myself in the position of the viewers, I try to anyway, and take a common sense view. I want to know more. I want to know if there's a science behind it. I want to know if all the things that you hear in the news from one side or the other side has any basis. I want a common sense evaluation, and I want a lot of questions answered. Now, I'm not sure whether those questions can be answered, but I think a discussion will help everybody to understand a little bit more about what's going on and what the future holds for the subject. And that's why I think this is very valid, and it deserves discussion. It deserves to be told.
We're going to meet some of the folks here in our studio audience who have opinions on the topic that we're going to have. And coming up next, we're going to meet some medical experts who will weigh in on this, and a Niagara County legislator, when our special prescription pot problem or promise continues right after this.
This is my iPod.
Your iPad. That's great. That's really great, actually. You should
All
go
right.
like that. So,
Wait a minute. I got to follow you now.
yep. What's your footing? It's tricky in here right now. So what I was going to show you
Yes,
is...
I could fall into sin.
Yeah. These are the babies.
Yeah.
Now what I've done is take clippings off of those plants, and you can make your own hormone, or you can buy a breeding hormone, and you dip them, and you put them in these cubes and let them incubate in these domes here for about a week.
All right, now what is this here? This is the...
Those ones were about the size of the inch ones, the inch tall ones that you saw last time you were here also. See, they're under very low light, so they're not growing very fast.
Are you controlling them?
Well, I'm trying to keep them low so that they're ready to go in there after we cut those down.
I see.
So then we can put those in there to be our new babies. And these will also be in there. That's why I cut them so tall.
When can we smoke them?
Well, technically, you could try to smoke anything. When will it work?
Yeah.
In about 4 weeks.
Oh. And you're hoping to buy some property.
Yes.
So that you can do this outdoors.
Yes.
Now, what's the difference between indoor and the outdoor?
The electric bill? No. Well, each plant yields more, and...
What, outdoors?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a better quality product indoors?
No, indoor is better quality product, yeah.
Now, are you going to get rich from this?
No.
You're not? What the
No.
hell are you doing it for then? That's a waste of time.
No, it's not.
It's not?
I like doing it, and I help people and myself, and it's like having any other job, you know?
Feel for the people who are still in the throes of alcoholism, who are still in the throes of addiction. And yes, you can become an addict of marijuana. It just, to me, if there's an expression, the lesser of all evils, that's it. It grows out of the ground. It's nature's way. The Indians ate peyote. It came from mushrooms and out of the ground. It's a natural substance. If God didn't want us to have it, he wouldn't have put it in the ground, and he wouldn't have made it able to grow.
There's no question that people get high on marijuana. There also is no question it's got medicinal uses as well. Many. And we're finding out even more. Different cannabinoids affect different conditions. And it may even get to the point where dentists will be prescribing it for some of the illnesses the patient has. But the issue here is, what right did the government have to make it illegal to begin with? What right does the government have to walk into your home and tell you what to do? You have a history, for example, laudanum. 100 years ago, a lot of women would do 1 bottle of laudanum, it's got opium, and they would be addicted. That wasn't good, something had to be done, and they did make laws against its use, and it made sense because you do it once and you're addicted. That is not the case with marijuana, nor is it the case with alcohol. So you really have to wonder why the government got involved. Now, what are the results? The results are pretty clear. You have a lot of innocent people in jail cells with real criminals. You have this poor kid who got caught with a joint in the same jail cell as someone who robs banks. Well, guess what? He's going to learn how to rob banks. So it's just fundamentally wrong. And basically, again, what right does the government have to interfere in your life? Now, marijuana is very useful for patients in chemo. Marijuana is useful for glaucoma. It's useful for a lot of things. But let's face it, a lot of people just get high on marijuana. But so what? How is that the government's business? This is my problem. And you'd think we would have learned from Prohibition. We didn't. No one's saying that alcohol is good. It doesn't really matter if you think alcohol is good or bad. What matters is, what right does the government have to do this?
Joining us now on set with Phil Arno from WBBZ-TV and Joy Reynolds, we'd like to introduce to you Dr. Bob Whitney. He's a board member of the Erie County Council of Prevention and Alcohol and Substance Abuse. He's practiced medicine for 35 years with people who have alcohol and substance abuse issues. Next to Dr. Bob Whitney is Catherine Lance, Republican Niagara County legislator representing the 7th District, who also has a very strong personal story to tell in addition to the legislative issues surrounding the Compassionate Care Act. And next to Catherine is Dr. Bill Wyzorek, Director and Professor at the Institute for Community Health Promotion, Center for Health and Social Research, Center for Development of Human Services at SUNY Buffalo State, a very distinguished panel, and we do thank you all for joining us on the show. So I guess maybe Dr. Bob, we'll start with you. What is your reaction to what you've seen here with Joey's video and the Compassionate Care Act overall as the world moves toward the use of marijuana for medical purposes?
Well, it's obviously a very broad topic and a broad question. Certainly the idea of a medication, whether it's an over-the-counter medication that we go to Rite Aid or any other places and we buy a medication and we know what's in it. We know that the main ingredients have been tested for safety and effectiveness. We know that the manufacturers have done a good job and they're inspected to make sure they're doing it right. Comparing that, even over-the-counter, prescription drugs obviously have much more scrutiny, but comparing those processes to a person who is a good agricultural person, I assume, I don't know that they're the same comparison at all. Specifically in terms of what the Compassionate Care Act in New York has done, is to help bridge that, of trying to make available to people that may very well possibly benefit from some of the components of marijuana, and doing that in a carefully controlled way, and also carefully controlling what the marijuana is, what its strength is, to make sure it's not contaminated with other things. It's a step in a direction that may answer both questions of how do we make it available to folks that conceivably could benefit, and how do we do that in a way that's the safest we know how to do. I think it's a step in the right direction for New York State. Interesting,
we have on MeTV, we've had Dragnet in the past. And about a month and a half ago, Jack Webb, in 1969, was doing a story on this very subject, marijuana. That's 46 years ago. The discussion hasn't changed in 46 years. The same questions, the same doubts.
The same laws.
Everything
has, the laws.
It's all
illegal.
the same.
Well, it was illegal.
What I want to know is what's different. Has there been studies? Has the science changed? Has it progressed at all?
I think it's progressed a lot in terms of what we are pretty sure about. And that's one of the advantages, I think, of science, is we can say we're pretty sure about something, explain why we believe that, but also be willing to learn from experience and say, well, maybe that wasn't right. Let's learn something different. For example, we know that marijuana does not make everybody who smokes it psychotic, as reefer madness would have had us believe in the 60s. But we do know that for people, particularly teens who are vulnerable, the chance of them developing a significant psychosis at a younger age is a real issue. Doesn't happen to everybody, but it's a real issue. That's pretty well agreed upon by people who've studied this.
What do you think? Let's have a woman's perspective of this. You're a very attractive young lady and you have children. What do you think about this?
You know, maybe I'll go back in a little bit of my personal history, because I'm also a breast cancer survivor.
Okay.
And I was diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer about 8 years ago. So I went through 16 treatments of chemotherapy. And now fast forward here now, I'm a Niagara County legislator. We were approached about supporting a resolution to growing medical marijuana in Lewiston. And I jumped right on board into that. It was suggested to me, not by my doctors, when I was going through chemotherapy, about some of the side effects that I was experiencing. But again, and I agree with Dr. Whitney, as long as I don't want to do anything to interfere or disrupt my treatment. And if at that point that was an option, I certainly would have tried it under a doctor's care with a controlled environment. I absolutely would have had any problems at all trying that as a relief to some of the symptoms, some of the side effects. I don't think people understand when you're going through chemotherapy, you know, how it affects everybody differently, and the whole slew of problems, not just with the chemotherapy, but from the other drugs that you're taking as well. Just not to mention steroids. I mean, they ran havoc on me. And I think that's where, if I had had an option of maybe trying something else, I would have tried it.
What do you think?
I think this is a highly nuanced topic, and that we try to oversimplify it, and that people use substances such as alcohol and other things such as marijuana since the beginning of civilization, and it'll continue to do so. But there's positives and negatives, and as we go towards especially a compassionate orientation to help people such as kids with seizure disorders, cancer patients, and so forth, that we are aware of the potential negative side effects, not necessarily for the people who are participating in those medical reasons, because the sicker you are, the more risky the treatment you're willing to take on. That's why we do surgeries, you know, when people are really sick, or to take, you know, chemotherapy. But part of the big issue is that we know, for even when it comes from the epidemiology, the impact on a medical side and for things such as overdose and deaths from marijuana, we know are relatively low, especially in adults. Where the main risk for this is especially in kids and in young teens, in which there's growing evidence of potential long-term neurological and cognitive impacts. And so when we start to make medical marijuana available, we want to make sure that we're only making it available to people who need this, and we don't accidentally open up the floodgates so that it's easy to get marijuana. And frankly, that's what happens in some of the states, and California is one of those kinds of states.
We're in a very strange society where there's a money chain attached to this. And what we have in Western New York that no one else has, I'm going to say this is a strange thing, is barley. We have these silos on the river here. Now, they used to store grain, and the big millers were here. I don't mean Meet the Millers on television. I'm talking about, if you're that old, I'm talking about the granaries. And they store it in those silos. Now, the reason for it was, in this area, they turned it into microbrewing because of the barley. The barley growth in this soil is very favorable, probably as unique as grapes being grown in Dunkirk and Fredonia. You wouldn't think, if you're sitting in wine country in California, that they're growing wine in Fredonia, New York, better than Gallo, but they are. And even Welch's grape juice, for instance. But you know, right here in this soil in Western New York, which has got a lot of wonderful gifts, we have a lot of gifts here, natural gifts. One of them is that soil for this barley that they're going to be using in pharmaceuticals, or what they call nutraceuticals.
Catherine, I'll start with you. So the viewer out there gets a handle on what the Compassionate Care Act really is.
It's basically encompasses using the medical marijuana for, there's a whole gambit of diseases out there that it could help with. AIDS sufferers, rheumatoid arthritis sufferers, cancer, people going through cancer treatments. And what it would do is make the medical marijuana available to those patients. And I think the one that most people are familiar with is the epilepsy in the Charlotte's Web, where I think that's the most popular one right now, is where it singled out to help children that were having multiple epileptic seizures.
And then Dr. Wazorek, we talked a little bit about some of the restrictions, because that was one of the concerns when you look at how, say in Denver, for example, pot is so readily available that people can have issues just with simply eating it, thinking, you know, this is going to be a cure-all. But here the restrictions are a lot different, and I know that was an important point for you to make.
Well, it's really important that the restrictions are different, because the bad side effects will come from very wide access, especially to youth for marijuana, the potential negative impact. And so part of the difference is that even though that was a relatively long list of illnesses, that's pretty minimal. For example, if you're in California, many dispensaries there will have their own doctors that you can go and complain about something as minimal as having recurrent headaches, get a prescription right there and go in and get this. New York State is not doing it that way. New York State has consciously thought through that we are not going to have thousands and thousands of outlets all over the place, and that we're going to have this, we're not going to have a very broad but very narrow and specific for what we believe is truly justifiable for using medical marijuana. And at this point, I believe in our history in the United States, that that makes sense. But it also makes sense to make sure that things such as edibles, in some kinds of situations, for example, people with some illnesses may need to eat their medical marijuana. But what you see out there are people making cookies and candies and things of this sort. And we've had many episodes of those who grew up in the 1960s as baby boomers and then said, oh, it's legal here in Colorado, and get a bunch of cookies and end up in the emergency room. Because once you're absorbing that, you can't turn it back. And things like kids are not going to be able to understand that, oh, that's a cookie, I shouldn't eat 5 of these cookies. They don't know what's in them. And that association with things such as psychotic episodes. It's rare, but the research on that has become really pretty clear. And it's also clear that the earlier the use, the stronger the potential association.
Epilepsy was brought up, and seizures in children, and we have a member of our studio audience. First of all, your name?
My name is Daniel Rishka.
And Daniel, explain your personal story and why you brought the photos here.
Sure.
Hold that up so we can see.
I'm a licensed New York State pharmacist. I have dedicated 9 years of my life studying medicine. I have learned pharmacology, medicinal chemistry, therapeutics. The origin of pharmacy is from plants. Plants are there to help people. Through the years, we've gone through pharmaceutical companies getting into the market and kind of going away from the roots of pharmacy. Cannabis has a lot of benefits. There are over 80 cannabinoids that are inside the plant that have pharmaceutical activity. Some of them cause psychoactivity. Some of them do not. One is cannabidiol. It is a non-psychoactive form of cannabis that has been shown to help epilepsy. My children are on 32 and 26 doses of medications every day. It's the equivalent of about 6 beers. And this is considered legal with the FDA. What I'm out here to do is try to decriminalize cannabis as a viable medical option. What the Compassionate Care Act has done is allowed for restricted access. There will be 20 locations all through New York State. The dispensaries will be staffed by pharmacists. The registered organizations will be staffed by pharmacists. There will be testing that is done on these products before it gets to the patient level. This is to ensure that it does not have any pesticides or any type of fungus or mold. As a pharmacist, we never want to give any product to a patient that could harm them. So what New York State has done is made things very tight to make sure that is a safe product that goes to the patients.
And then as a parent, you would want to do anything in your power to make sure your children get better, feel better.
Definitely, within legal means.
So Dr. Bob, I'll come to you. What is your response to that? Are we jumping ahead of the science with these prescriptions and with what we see? Is there enough study?
This is a perfect example of we're doing things in New York State, a couple of things simultaneously. One is in time, and I know most of us, and I don't have a child who has this syndrome, but if I did, I'd want that available tomorrow. It's not available tomorrow in New York State, but it will be hopefully by the 1st of next year. Even if nothing has changed, that's what the law says. The problem is, if you came to me, if I were a pediatrician and a pediatric neurologist, and you said, can you recommend this for my son or my daughter? I would have to say, based on the science, I don't know whether it's any good or not. I know there are lots of people who say it's worked for their children, but we have case reports about all kinds of things that when you really carefully look at it in a wide population of people over a period of time, it turns out maybe that's not quite so. Maybe it isn't going to work for most kids with Dravet's and other difficult syndromes. Maybe it's going to be dangerous for those kids. Now, I understand that maybe the risk when it's so catastrophic illness, maybe the risk isn't so concerned, but as a physician or if I were a pharmacist, I'd want to be able to ethically say, here's the potential benefit. I can't say that because there is not enough, there are no long-term, more than a few weeks studies of kids, whether it's Colorado or Israel or any place else. There is no study. I've looked for all that, and other people
What
have.
about the Roswell? I mean, you're right here. This is the cancer center of the world.
Yeah, but they don't study
children.
Seizures.
They don't.
No, but I'll tell you what New York is doing in parallel.
Well, does Roswell have that information?
No.
They don't?
They do not. It's because it's not
You
there.
mean they're not telling you?
It's not there. There is no such literature. I don't have to ask Roswell. I've asked other experts. There's a specialist in New York City at NYU who is a neurologist who has gotten a grant to start studying it in kids. The state of Colorado finally, besides getting the millions of dollars they claim they're getting from fully legalized marijuana, is now spending, they just approved it in the last month or two, $1.5 million to do the kind of science that we need so that we can have crystal clear recommendations for individuals. Here's the risk and the benefit, and a better understanding of what's the risk to society at large. This whole, and I would agree with Dr. Wazorek that sometimes it's a difficult topic. We need to be looking at, does it help this person? What's the risk to this person? What's the risk to the population at whole and large? In other words, is it going to cause other troubles that we don't now understand?
With trials, first of all, cannabis is a Schedule I narcotic, so that limits the testing that can be done. Second of all, since 2000, there's been over 30 pharmaceutical products that the FDA has approved that have been removed because it has caused death or harm to patients. So that's considered appropriate, where there has been zero, as far as I know, overdoses associated with cannabis.
Dr. Bob?
You said several things. The first I would say is you're right. There is very low risk, if any, of an overdose from taking too much marijuana. I would agree with that. But the rest of the story is, what about the edible problem, which is not a trivial issue, as Colorado is now figuring out. It doesn't kill people, but it gets them to jump out the window or contributes to that and all kinds of other catastrophes. What about the driving while impaired by marijuana issue? It may kill the driver and it may kill some of the rest of us, which is sort of the third leg of what I think is so important that we get better information about. That is, I might not be doing marijuana, but if somebody runs into me after they've smoked a few joints and they kill me, that's not fair to those of us who are being affected by that kind of thing. Not just the person that took it, but effect on the community at large. That has to be part of the discussion.
Phil,
well, if you do that, then alcohol has to be illegal, because that's the worst killer of all with drivers.
That leads us to another aspect of this, and that is the similarity between alcohol and what was prohibition and this whole marijuana discussion. There's a similarity there between the alcohol and marijuana. Neither one arguably is addictive, I mean, or addictive to the same degree if they are addictive. And they both have a similar level of impairment. I mean, you don't want to get behind the wheel of a car if you're going to be using them. There are a lot of similarities. So if alcohol is legal, then why wouldn't marijuana be legal with the same restrictions? Okay, it seems like you can go to when prohibition was in force and apply that to marijuana. When prohibition was in force, the crime rate actually went up. You know, murders and violent crime went up. Alcohol consumption went down, but not by very much. And the studies show that actually there was a migration away from the milder form of alcohol. Beer became less popular and whiskey became much more popular. They went for the harder stuff. I guess maybe if it was illegal, they wanted to get the most bang for the buck or something. But there were a lot of studies that said that more deaths occurred when prohibition was in place. More deaths related to alcohol because they had the bad stuff. There were a lot of pluses and minuses, but having marijuana be illegal is not necessarily a good thing if you compare it to the way alcohol was criminalized.
Well, alcohol, first of all, gives you false confidence.
Marijuana does marijuana?
No.
It doesn't do that?
Alcohol does. Cocaine does. Sexually, too, if you're interested. But you know, there's a whole deal here of balance. It's chemicals. You're dealing with chemicals. But the herb is growing in the ground. I mean, marijuana is growing. Now, I interviewed a doctor here. We got a tape of this, don't we?
Because I could see what the science was saying and how this could no longer be ignored. The science is clear. Marijuana's cannabinoids supplement our own internal cannabinoids. We make cannabinoids. If you've never used marijuana, you're holding cannabinoids. You know, essentially you theoretically could be arrested for having an analog of marijuana's THC in your body.
So this has got to be cannabinoiding you for a long time.
Yeah. and so anyway,
I'm going to go to pun hell, you know that.
You're a punographer. These cannabinoids, I could see, you know, the studies show that what they do is they match up with our own protective compounds. And these compounds in our bodies, they exist to regulate practically every system and organ function in our body and modulate it and protect it from toxicity and inflammation.
Well, then there's no comparison between this and liquor.
No. Everything, cannabis, marijuana protects us from many of the harms that liquor does. Alcohol. There was a recent finding when they looked at alcohol and they determined that there is no safe threshold for alcohol use with regard to cancer risk. All alcohol use to some degree promotes cancer. All marijuana use discourages cancer because the cannabinoids work selectively on cancer cells. THC attacks cancer cells through receptors and changes their genetic expression so that they produce compounds that cause themselves to die off. Like they go into a form of suicide called apoptosis, the dying off of cells. Cancer cells selectively are attacked by cannabinoids, while the healthy surrounding cells are enhanced in their health.
Doctors know this.
They don't. Very few doctors do, because cannabinoid science is only beginning to be taught in medical school.
So what do you want to see happen?
I want to see doctors, physicians get curious about this, wipe the reefer madness residue away from their consciousness, and deal with this on a scientific level and look at it. I want the public to learn that marijuana has powerful protective effects and that they can protect themselves from Alzheimer's, diabetes, various forms of cancer, maybe all forms of cancer, other inflammation-related diseases, liver disease, kidney disease, heart disease, because it's the inflammation that promotes these diseases, and marijuana neutralizes this inflammation. I want the public to get on board with legalization, and we need to get it legalized, because people who don't want to get high can benefit from marijuana. You can take tincture, and you can take a few droppers, a dropper full of tincture before you go to bed, and you're not going to get high, but what that tincture is going to do is introduce these cannabinoids into your body that are going to sabotage the inflammation process. They're going to stop some of this oxidative damage. They're going to modulate any harmful immune reaction that is attacking your body and put you in a better state of health. There's no arguing this. This is science and it's fact.
When we talk about psychosis with marijuana, as someone who used to smoke marijuana in their younger years and then later was prescribed narcotic pain medication for some pretty serious surgeries, do you believe that there's any difference between the psychosis that marijuana causes versus an addict who is withdrawing from opiate-based substances? Number one. Number two is the whole business aspect of it. I'm sure if the right people were bankrolling this thing, we'd have all the studies that we absolutely needed for it. But because the pharmaceutical companies that run the country aren't necessarily on board yet, there's no evidence for it.
Well, you raised several points. I am worried about the money side of it. If we go back to how we regulate alcohol, and let me throw in nicotine while we're at it. We make them legal even though they're more dangerous than these other things. We know many things that would go even further to reduce the catastrophe from those drugs, but we don't do it because of the money side. We don't, for example, raise taxes on alcohol. The science is unequivocal. If we could do that, raise the taxes even a little, we would reduce the billions of dollars that get wasted on alcohol in terms of how it affects people and taxpayers and everybody else. We don't do that because of the pressure that's by money. Now, what New York State has done with the Compassionate Care Act is regulate that much more tightly than we could now do with alcohol, because there isn't so much.
Well, do you think it's fair to have 5 growers?
I think it's a good place
with
to
millions
start.
of people, only 5 people are allowed to grow this? I mean, what is that all about?
That's a place to start.
You
yes.
start by letting everybody do whatever they know how to do. Listen,
but how do you
first of all,
control the quality, though?
Wait, you don't have to control anything. That's the whole point. We're so busy controlling everything that we control nothing.
Can't you get bad stuff if you're not, I mean, is there a purity
do we not let everybody in this society be the end judge in our free marketplace by a quality control that people will tell you when something doesn't work, they don't buy it anymore?
Well, is there a danger?
That's the American
is there a
way.
level where it could be dangerous?
Well, of course there is. I mean,
Let the doctor jump in.
We don't, you can't, you could technically do it.
Yeah.
You couldn't legally start growing opium in your backyard for your own personal use, to make your own heroin.
Well, I don't compare opium to marijuana.
Well, I
It's
do.
a whole different deal.
And it's not a whole different deal.
Opium is an opiate. It's a part of something that's very,
But now we're saying marijuana is a medication. Let's call it a medication.
Well, it is medicine.
Well, sure. If we're going to use that.
Opium is not a medicine until it becomes.
Marijuana is a plant. You showed us good pictures of the plant.
Yeah, I know, and it's kind of nice, isn't it?
It looks beautiful, and so do the poppy plants.
Yeah, well, you better not have that on your porch.
Yeah, Bob, I'm going to jump in here a little bit. I think what Joey's doing, though, is confusing 2 different issues and treating them as if they're the same. That the recreational use of marijuana is not really differentiable from the medical use of marijuana. And that what New York State is doing is a very well-reasoned approach, in my opinion, from a public health perspective, of how to be compassionate and provide something that we may not even have absolute proof that works, but because of the circumstances are so exigent, we need to do something to help kids and cancer patients, AIDS patients, and so forth. But that's a very different issue than it is for let everyone grow it. Because if you're going to use this like a medication, we ought to be treating it like a medication, and New York State is doing that. If we're going to go down the path of recreational marijuana, well, let's talk about some of the myths. You often hear on how much money is Colorado making because they're taxing marijuana. You know how much they plan on making in this year? $60 million. That sounds like a lot of money. It's probably not even going to cover the cost of overview of the system, but what does $60 million do? It's only about 10% of the Buffalo Public Schools budget. This is not some panacea. The myth that this is going to drive anything other than the people making marijuana having profits and money, that it's going to fill the coffers of government, is an absolute myth.
But the business of this is also something that I think is a motivator, because you had voted for a facility in Lewiston, a greenhouse, that might be one of the 5 in New York State that would grow marijuana. I would think that would be a lucrative contract to have.
Absolutely. That's certainly something that we had not thought of before. We were in support of this, and part of my platform is economic development into Niagara County, so we thought this was a great idea. Unfortunately it is, yeah, someone will make money off of this, as well as someone made money off of legalizing alcohol. But I think having Niagara County jump onto this, I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, I believe the taxes, is 22.5%, I think, is what the county might pick up on it, if I'm thinking of that figure exactly.
Yes.
2 years ago on this very stage, we talked about the painkillers kill problem, where drugs were abused and can be abused. Have you experienced that?
I'm actually in recovery myself. I'm a recovering heroin addict, and one of the things you spoke about is regulation. When I think about the pharmaceutical community and what I know about opiates, what they've done to me, the road that they've led me down, I wonder how the medical community, along with the pharmaceutical companies, can justify constantly pushing out stronger, more aggressive pain management medication that was essentially designed for end-of-life care, like your fentanyls, things like that, prescribed to people in a hospice setting who are truly end-of-life care. And anyone can go to a doctor now and be prescribed these high-powered pain medications where the medical community, along with the pharmaceutical companies, are so greedy that they're actually creating the addicts that roam the streets today.
Well, how about the argument that if marijuana becomes more pervasive, that the same problem you're seeing with the painkillers is the problem you'll see with people abusing marijuana as this, some people would make the claim that legalizing it is next and using it poorly and growing it in ways that are not regulated would lead to the same issues that you just heard this gentleman mention.
I think I'm glad you brought us back to that point, because I think we can learn from that experience. What happened with this?
We haven't, though. We could, but we haven't because people are greedy.
Well, and people are greedy. That seems to be built into most people, and I'll include myself.
I don't have a
and
job
that,
right
to
now,
some degree, is where regulation by society becomes part of the balancing act.
As a member of the substance abuse community, what's your reaction?
Well, I think wherever you sit on the spectrum of opinions regarding marijuana, I think there's a lot of common ground about people worrying about young people getting harmfully involved at a young age. I think we all agree that that's a potentially dangerous and unhealthy situation to have. I know that in our curriculum packages where we are working in schools, we ask kids about their perception of harmfulness of marijuana use. We ask that because it's a key indicator of potential use down the road, and one of the major benchmarks that our field uses to kind of get a look at what might be down the road as far as use patterns. And with all the things that have been happening across the country, we have seen a difficulty in convincing young people that there are dangers in using marijuana. And I guess that's one of the big fears that people in our profession would have with some of the things that are going on. I'd love to hear Dr. Wyzoryk's opinion as an epidemiologist about what we see down the road and what we really need to be focusing on going forward.
Dr. Bill?
Yeah, I think one of the major points to make about this, especially when it comes to kids, when it comes to medical marijuana, with medical marijuana, nobody's suggesting that this should be opened up broadly to everyone as a medical marijuana situation. Some other states have how they've implemented it, especially California. They've basically made it is a de facto overall legalization. But when you go to kids, and this is the sophistication about marijuana, is that it can be especially risky for them while they're developing, yet for them to understand that risk, that 10 years later, it may not be as risky for them to use, is a very complex thing to be able to teach and to put into place. And so we know that if you can put off, and what we're talking about, the age is really about 16 or before. And we know that if you can put off using almost any drug, every year you put it off over age 16, you substantially decrease your risk of having any addiction with that drug. If you don't start using any drugs till about age 21 or so, your risk of addiction is exceedingly low.
I know someone that was almost addicted to alcohol, and alcoholism affected their liver and other things like that. With other drugs, there's something like methadone and things like that that help in rehab. And some studies have come out for cannabis that showed that it can help get off of harder drugs. And this isn't in the Compassionate Care Act, but how do you feel about that?
That's a good question. And the short answer, my opinion, based on what I understand of it, is that we don't have the answer to that. We do know from recovering people's experience that most people who are trying to get off of one drug, if they continue to use marijuana, they don't end up getting off any of it. They end up back to where they started from. It's crystal clear, however, from California and Colorado and other places so far, is that marijuana is not replacing alcohol. It's in addition to alcohol. It's in addition to nicotine. So I think the chances that it's going to be a good substitute and good for everybody and good for the community and good for government, I think is not likely. But I'm perfectly willing to say, let's give it time in the states and see what happens.
First of all, I want to say you have a lot of courage to do this kind of a show, really do. And I think it was a very meaningful discussion tonight. Kudos to Joey for making this a national documentary, which may open the eyes of people and all the lawmakers and all the doctors and everyone involved. I think it takes a lot of courage to take an issue like this head on, and congratulations.
Phil?
Well, I'd like to thank Joey for letting us start this conversation. Obviously, we're not going to answer all the questions that have been asked over the last several decades, but it's a start. And if it gets people to think about it and maybe answer a few questions and get them to do a little research, I think it's accomplished what we've set out to do. But again, I'd like to thank Joey for doing it, and I urge everybody to get a copy of his documentary, because it does kind of give you a glimpse into the background and how things work in what's going to be very prevalent in our society. So we'll be ending with some information on how you get that documentary. But once again, thanks very much.
I don't know what to say about medical marijuana. You probably have gotten the idea that I don't smoke, and I'm not too crazy about my daughter selling to people who are illegal. You know, I mean, I want it to stay above board. That's the primary thing: responsibility and above board.
On behalf of our studio audience who has joined us here in our WBBZ-TV studio at the Eastern Hills Mall, I want to thank them for offering their opinion, taking their time to spend on the evening that we're recording this. Jay Sorensen, thank you for coming in. Phil, of course, the opportunity to do this. Dr. Bob Whitney, thank you for your candid discussion and reaction. Catherine Lance, good luck to you in Niagara County. Congratulations being a cancer survivor, and good luck as you pursue your political career in Niagara County. And Dr. Wojorek, thank you very much for your participation, and good luck to you serving the addiction community and what you do. And Joy Reynolds, as always, what is your signature sign-out line?
We say, let a smile be your umbrella, but don't get a mouthful of rain. That's what I always say.
Thank you very much. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody.